We speak about a woman who gives birth to a male. Ubiyom hashmidi imo b'saroloso. On the 8th day, you will circumcise the flesh of his arla, of his foreskin, meaning you remove the foreskin. We know that the Torah tells us, based on a pasuk, the Torah says if a person is in a life-threatening situation, that life-threatening situation is the overriding factor and it supersedes the Torah. Whether it's regarding dietary laws, whether it's regarding observance of Shabbos or Yom Kippur, if it's a question of a person's life is in jeopardy or observing the law, human life takes precedence over the Torah law, except for the 3 cardinal sins. However, we find regarding the korbanos in the Beis Hamikdash or in the Mishkan, the sacrifice that were brought, the daily sacrifices, they were brought even on Shabbos. Because the Torah says, b'moado. It has to be brought in their times. So regardless of when the time is, even if it's Shabbos, even if it's Yom Tiv, one brings the communal sacrifice. What about something like the Korban Pesach? The Korban Pesach, Torah says it has to be brought on the 14th of Nisan, and it's a personal korban. Since the Torah says b'moado, and the Torah says explicitly it has to be brought on the 14th, so if Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos, and Motzoi Shabbos is the Seder, is the 15th, every person brings his personal Korban Pesach on Shabbos. But that's relating to a korban, a sacrifice. Sacrifice has to be brought in its time. Cumulative sacrifices, their time is whenever they're meant to be brought. The Korban Pesach is the only sacrifice which has to be brought on a specific day. Any other personal sacrifice could be brought whenever you bring it. It doesn't have to be brought on Shabbos. Yet, when it comes to circumcision, if a child is born on Shabbos, the circumcision supersedes the Shabbos. How do we know it supersedes the Shabbos? Because the Torah tells us in this pasuk, Ubiyom hashmini. The Torah could have said, Ubiyom shmini. On the 8th day, you should circumcise the flesh of his foreskin, remove the foreskin. What does it say, hashmini, that hay? The hay tells us that even if it's Shabbos, even if it's that special day, which is Shabbos, Milah, circumcision, supersedes the Shabbos, although it's not a communal offering. It must be done, the Torah says it must be done on the 8th day. On the 8th day, you remove that foreskin regardless of what day it is. It could be Yom Kippur, it could be Shabbos, it doesn't make a difference. So evidently that clearly tells you the degree of importance of removing that foreskin. The foreskin has to be removed. There's an argument, we rule a halacha, nobody disagrees, on Shabbos, all the 39 creative activities are learned from the Mishkan. Whatever was considered an activity, a creative activity, which was needed to build the Mishkan, that is not permitted on Shabbos. What about if a person does the same activity, but it's in a destructive context, not constructive? It's called mekalkel. There's no liability on a Torah level whatsoever. Why? Because in the Mishkan, all the activities, which are considered the 39 classifications of creative activity, they were all in a constructive context. It was to build the Mishkan. But if it was destructive, since it's not similar to what was done in the Mishkan, one has no liability. Have rabbinically, you're not permitted to do it. But on Torah level, one is not in violation. However, there's a question, what about regarding Netilas Neshama? The Gemara tells us that if you extract blood from a living creature, whether even an animal, an insect, or a human being, or any living entity, one is in violation. It's Torah violation. What's the violation? It's called Netilas Neshama. Normally, what does Netilas Neshama mean? It's taking a life. In the Mishkan, they would slaughter the animals for their hides. So it was killing. So how is extracting blood, even a minuscule amount of blood, one is a violation of the Netilas Neshama? So Rabbeinu Tam explains in a number of locations that when the Torah speaks about the prohibition of eating blood, why is one not permitted to eat blood? Ki dam hu nefesh. Because blood, the life source, life lies in the blood. So when you extract blood and you take it out of the circulatory system, you're taking part of the life of that living entity. That is the prohibition of extracting blood. So the classification of the melacha is called Netilas Neshama, taking life. Although in the Mishkan they actually kill the animal for its hides, but any amount of blood that you take out, you're taking part of that living creature's life. Therefore, that's the Torah violation of the Netilas Neshama. So now, when you circumcise a child, it's what? It's you're extracting blood because it's causing a wound. Therefore, you'd say that the melacha, the reason why the Torah has to write that extra hay to tell us that if a child was born on the 8th day, even though it's Shabbos, Mila, circumcision supersedes the Shabbos. Because there's a melacha, it entails a melacha. You're extracting blood because you're creating a wound. Now, but the question is this, but it's makalkel. The mitzvah is to remove the foreskin. That's the mitzvah. Remove the foreskin is what? That's what circumcision is. The blood is not the mitzvah, except the only way you can remove the foreskin, it entails creating a wound, which causes extraction of blood. Why isn't that mekalkel? It's discussed tomorrow on Shabbos. So there's an argument, or if a child is born with the foreskin, and now that you're removing it, why isn't it considered a diminishment of the person? So it's a machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and Reb Shimon. Whether Netilas Neshama is the exception to the rule that although the characteristic to be liable for violation of Shabbos, you need the creative aspect, has to be constructive rather than destructive. When it comes to Netilas Neshama, taking blood, even if it's destructive, you're in violation of extracting blood, even in destructive context. It's an argument, or the other one says, no, there's no proof. Why? Because what's the halacha? It's something called makeh bepatish. If you take something and you put the finishing touches on something, it's makeh bepatish. It's a separate category of creative activity. Over here, the Gemara says it's called tikkun gavra. Removing the foreskin of a Jew, you're perfecting the person. So therefore, the act of the removal of the foreskin and whatever it entails, that's called a constructive act. That's not destructive. For instance, if a person would do ritual slaughter on Shabbos, to eat the animal, what is it? If a person just would kill an animal, that would be destructive. You've destroyed an animal. But over here, where the reason why you're removing the foreskin is because the Jew is considered not perfect. He's considered imperfect until that foreskin is removed. So that's called tikkun gavra. You're perfecting the person. The child now has reached a perfected state. Therefore, that's not called mekalkel, but that's called misakin. That's called constructive rather than destructive. As a result of that, you need a special Torah dispensation or permission to circumcise that child on the 8th day, even though the 8th day falls out on Shabbos. It's called tikkun gavra. Now, why is it called tikkun gavra? I mean, to get it really into the roots of it, it is because Torah says you're supposed to remove the foreskin. But you understand, we always discuss, and here the Orach Chaim HaKadosh cites the Zohar. What does the foreskin represent? The foreskin represents the evil of the Eitz Hadas. When Adam was created, he did not have a foreskin. When he ate of that fruit which was considered good and evil, the evil expressed itself by developing that foreskin which covered the male organ. That is an expression of the Ra, of the evil. This is the most lethal level of evil which exists in existence. Therefore, the mitzvah for which was given to Avraham Avinu is to remove that. By removing that, it gives the Jew the ability to have a certain degree of sensitivity, to be in a context, to be able to make to have free choice. If a person has no control over his behavior, what is he? He doesn't have really free choice. For instance, the law is, we speak about a shota. A shota doesn't mean a person who's retarded or a person who's crazy. A shota means a person who has no control over his choice. A person who has a chemical imbalance that from moment to moment, you don't know exactly, and he has no control over his decision making because his impulses take over. He cannot control himself. That's a shota. A responsible person who has liability because he's behaving irresponsibly because it's within his ability to control his impulses and his decision-making process. That's a rational person. A person who's irrational because he has no control, that's shota. He's not held accountable for his behavior. When Adam ate of the Eitz Hadas, that evil actually affected him negatively, that he has no control over the sensitivities that one needs to achieve the objective of creation, to make those decisions and to address many issues. It's not within his ability. Therefore, a non-Jew is only limited to the Shev Mitzvah Bnei Noach, to the 7 Noahide laws. A Jew who is given the covenant of Avram, which is Milah, we remove it. Removing that foreskin opens endless channels of sensitivity to spirituality. Therefore, the Jew has 248 positive commandments and 365 negative commandments. Because we're a different dimension of reality, because that evil really of course, it has relevance to us because we're still descending of Adam, but Avram's level of accomplishment, what he actually brought about within himself, and we being his descendants, we are beneficiaries of that when we remove the foreskin, it actually minimizes the effect of that evil. Therefore, we have certain control and certain sensitivities, which allows us to be in the decision process to make those choices which are necessary to achieve the objective of creation, which is the perfection of the soul. As a result of that, it's so crucial to the value of our function. Therefore, if the child is born even on Shabbos, it's so essential to the function of that child, you remove that. Because only now does the child now come into play, so to say, to the function that he's able to function as that semi-spiritual being to achieve within the spiritual realm that his actions should have value.